Okay, good evening everyone. So what we'll do today is go into another segment of tip time where we take a deep dive into your questions. The question for today is a really good one from John, and it's stemming from a previous video I did on nose riding. And it's essentially just asking and clarifying what's the importance of staying critical or in the hook when we're nose riding. To answer this, what I'll do is I'll go through, the importance of staying critical, and at the end I'll chuck a little example of what I do, how I think about staying critical, and a little example from my previous video as to how I position myself as well. But to get into it, I think it's really important to stay critical on the wave when we're nose riding, just as a really simple answer to it. Firstly, because it feels amazing. I think that locked in feeling you get with a nice in the hook nose ride is probably the best feeling you can get on a longboard. When we get that lift and that levitation underneath the nose, it's amazing. So that's probably the first reason, but let's talk a little bit about why it's important and what it's actually doing to the board and our position on the wave. So I like to break this down by starting out thinking about if we're nose riding out on the face of the wave or out on the shoulder away from the hook. And so if you can imagine what the board would look like there, we'd actually, the tail would be exposed. And so we'd be able to see the whole tail, and that means there wouldn't be very much water going down onto the tail. This becomes a problem when we're walking up to the nose of the board because, again, there's not enough weight or there's nothing counteracting our weight at the front of the board. And so therefore we'll tend to nosedive, as many people do and as I have a number of times. And so what we need to make sure we're doing is allowing our position on the wave to hold the tail down. And that's what we get when we come into the critical part of the wave, or the hook. So in terms of where we're positioning our board, if it's in the hook, I like to think about that nose is really close to where the wave is actually breaking. And so therefore sometimes you might see the tail kind of getting barreled, or essentially you've got a whole bunch of water or the white water breaking onto that tail. And that applies enough force onto the tail so that when you do run up to the front, we've got enough counteracting force to, I suppose, allow us to stay on the nose. And when we escape from that critical section on the nose, that's, our time or our cue to get off the nose, or otherwise we might nosedive. It does change a little bit depending on equipment as well, and I'll touch on that later. So there are some boards that allow us to nose ride further on the shoulder of the wave, but certainly I think it's one of the better feelings to try and get that nice critical nose ride. The other reason that nose riding in the hook works is because you'll actually create a lot of lift underneath the nose. And this is due to the critical nature of where you're positioning your board. So if you're on a flat part of the wave or the shoulder, you obviously won't be able to get a lot of lift underneath that nose. But when we are nice and critical, there's a steep drop off where the nose won't be able to, connect to the wave properly. And that's a good thing. If you've got the board that can hold you in, and again, that comes down to equipment, but that's a good thing. We get a really nice, great lift of the nose. So speaking about equipment, there are a couple of things that I like to consider here. Firstly, it's just that our fin setup is going to be really important when we're considering how critical we can get or how underneath the hook we can get with our nose rides. So if we've got a big, a pivot fin or a really big fin, single fin for the most part, that allows, holds down as a really good anchor in the critical sections, then we're less likely to have that board slip out of the wave when it is critical, as opposed to something like a 2+1 setup, which can definitely ride in the critical section of the wave on the nose, but if we're getting in a really fast critical section, that's where we might see the fins escape, and we might have to backpedal quickly, or we might just lose the control through the tail there. And you've got a little bit more safety the more rocker you have in your boards as well. So if you've got something like a more heavily rocketed out log or high performance board, that will be, where we can actually nose ride further out on the face of the wave. In terms of, not that this should be what dictates your surfing, but if you are a competitive surfer, in terms of the point scoring potential, they do want to see that you're further back in the hook of the wave. I would argue that it's a really good feeling being in the hook of the wave as well. But, a nose ride's a nose ride, and that's epic no matter how you do it. But yeah, the more heavily rocketed boards, similar to some of the boards I've got as well, they'll be a little bit better at nose riding on the face of the wave or out on the shoulder. And the risk is there that sometimes you can become a little bit used to nose riding in those parts of the wave. Because you can do that, you don't maybe force yourself to go as critical as you could be. So that's just something to think about with the more heavily rocketed boards as well. In terms of, I suppose, getting in the critical section, the first thing that I'd probably have a think about is just staying nice and patient. So you can sometimes see the really good loggers out there, when they're waiting for a nose ride, they're kind of just lingering around that critical section. So they'll be riding from the tail and coming back towards the white water and just kind of stalling themselves maybe at the bottom of the wave. And they're just kind of lingering around that area until the right opportunity or the right part of the wave opens itself up for the nose ride. And so I think being patient in that sort of way and just waiting for the opportunity to arise is a really, really important skill, and being able to make those fine adjustments on the wave, similar to what we spoke about in our last tip time, is going to be really, really important as well. I think probably the best advice I could give from my own experience and from talking to people is worry about what's in front of you and don't worry about what's behind you. A lot of the time, if we're thinking, I guess if you're looking at hindsight in some footage of your surfing, you think, I need to be back there. How do I know that the wave looked like that behind me? Just focus on what's in front. If you're in a section and it looks like the wave is critical enough, of course, go to the nose. And if it looks like it's not, that's just your indicator to make sure you're coming back and you're winding yourself back towards the white water to then, hopefully see that section where you are in the wave stand up a little bit more. And I think what we'll do is we'll go through a little bit of an example now. So if you have a look at this wave, what I do initially is I'm just sort of milking it in, and I have a feeling or a sense based on how the waves had been breaking previously that the wave was going to stand up. So I'm just being nice and patient here. And as soon as it does stand up and it gets nice and critical, that's my entry into the nose. And so if I had have just ran through this section really quickly at the start, or not stalled or positioned myself further back and waited, kind of lingered around that area, as I was alluding to before, I would have beaten that section and I wouldn't have been able to make the most of this nose ride. The main thing about this one here was just slowing down and waiting for the wave to shape up, and requires a bit of prediction as to what's the wave's going to do as well. All right, and I guess that wraps up this week's tip time. So we'll have another tip time next week. So if you've got any questions, please drop them in the comments below, and I'm happy to try and answer those next week or in an upcoming segment. And then we've still got the Sunday Glide coming up this Sunday, another good one this week, so keep an eye out for that one. Other than that, if you do want to support the channel, feel free to check out the links in the description below. And if you wanted any online coaching or anything like that, there's some information in the description as well. Hope you guys are getting waves, and we'll speak to you soon.